Washington Journal continues.
Paul Rieckhoff joins us now. He's a former Army infantry officer, founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America, host of the Independent Americans podcast. And Paul Rieckhoff, when we all found out the U.S. planes had bombed Iran on Saturday night, you posted this on your X feed. First commit the country, then commit the troops. He, President Trump, didn't do that, and that's a recipe for challenges. What do you mean by that?
Well, that's an old adage that I think is true, especially in times like this where the president hasn't had a conversation with Congress or really the American people. I'm somebody who served in Iraq. We can all remember times like Vietnam. And I think what we need most of all to remember is that our sons and daughters, young men and women in uniform, are in harm's way. And anytime you commit them in harm's way, I would argue whether it's for strikes in Iran or even deploying them into the streets of Los Angeles, you need to get the country behind them. You need to talk to the American people. You need to try to get bipartisan support, because when things drag on, if they go sideways or even if they go well, you want the country behind those young men and women. And when they're not, that creates a very divisive, very politicized environment. And that's what we had before these Iran strikes even happened, with the deployment of National Guard troops in an unprecedented way into California, with the activation now of the Marines in California, active duty in 3 other states. Trump has been blowing through the guardrails of the norms of how the president's supposed to have an open and honest conversation with the American people before we go to conflict, war, whatever they want to call it. And that hasn't happened here. And I think over time in American history and over multiple military engagements, it doesn't turn out well often.
Setting Los Angeles aside for a second, what does the War Powers Act mean for President Trump and Iran?
I think we're going to find out. I mean, this is another area of deep water that we haven't been in before. I mean, again, if I were counseling the president, if I had my druthers, the conversation that he had after the strike, where he laid out what was the threat in his view, what the plan was, what the next steps were, that should have happened beforehand. He could have also counseled with the Gang of Eight, brought in a bipartisan group of leaders in Congress to lay out at least the scope of what he was considering. Of course, you don't have to share operational details and secure information, but having that conversation up front, I think, would have set him and others up for success. But this is our new normal, especially after 9/11. I'm coming to you from New York, where just a couple blocks away I was activated for 9/11 at Ground Zero. After 9/11, we got sent to Afghanistan, we got sent to Iraq, and there was no declaration of war. There was no formal conversation and commitment on behalf of the Congress and the American people, as I believe the Constitution and our country was intended. So it's become, unfortunately, I think, a new normal after 9/11, with the expanded use of the AUMF, with engagements around the world. The country's kind of gotten used to forever war. And while folks may be tuning out at times over the last decade or so, our men and women have been continuing to be in conflict. There have been strikes by the Houthis. There are other engagements in other countries around the world. And frankly, most Americans don't even know they're happening. So every time we have an engagement like this, a high emotion strike point, I think it's an important point for Americans of all backgrounds to reflect and talk about how we engage in conflict and how we can do a better job of it and how we can be more transparent with the American people.
You say this is the new normal. Does Congress want this responsibility? Does Congress, there's been obviously individual members who have been very vocal saying that they want this responsibility, that the president has to come to them and seek authorization. But do you think the majority of the 535 members of the House and Senate want this on their heads?
Yeah, it's on all of them. I mean, what's interesting is the pushes recently to repeal the AUMF have come from bipartisan post 9/11 veterans, folks who served in my time, who said, this has gone on for too long. Congress has abdicated their responsibility. They're derelict in their duty. They need to step in here. And I would argue, no matter what party you're from, or if you're an independent like me and most Americans at this point, you have a duty as an elected leader to flex the power of Congress, to hold the president accountable, to have a conversation, and most of all, to represent your constituents. Some folks watching right now may support this action. Many don't, but their elected leaders didn't even get a say. And when the president circumvents Congress and Congress abdicates that responsibility, that's not only bad for our democracy, it's bad for our military. It's bad for our men and women in uniform. It's bad for our allies. It's bad for our international standing. And we are coming into this Monday, John, with some very, very deep waters. We think it can't get deeper, but almost every day we've got a new national security issue that is unprecedented and drags us into deeper and more unprecedented waters.
Stepping down from war powers, as a military guy, what was your reaction strictly to the tactical, the strategic objectives here? As we learn about this mission, what were your takeaways?
I mean, as a military person myself, my thoughts are always with the men and women in uniform conducting this operation. I'm thinking about the pilots that were in the air for 36 hours, which is an incredible feat. Obviously, this is a unique opportunity to test the B-2 platform and find out what the capability of that is. And I also thought about the 40,000 troops in the region. Because once an engagement like this happens, we know that the threat level is raised. The threat level here at home is also now raised. So I think about it holistically. I think about my friends who are still serving right now. I think about my friends who've served over the last 20 years. And I am frustrated, I think most of all, John, by the lack of transparency. The Pentagon hadn't done a press conference in months prior to this. We finally got one yesterday at 8 a.m. with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the SecDef, but they weren't doing weekly press conferences. They weren't keeping the American people updated. So there's a lack of trust there, and I think that's understandable. Americans have a right to question their authorities, especially when they're sending men and women into harm's way. And now we're into that period where we don't know. We don't know how effective the strikes are. We don't know what happens next. And Trump has got to play catch-up here. I hope he'll play catch-up and try to engage the American people and Congress in a conversation about what actually happened and what's next.
Tactics and strategy. Jeffrey Lewis posted on his X feed, professor, former State Department. He writes a extended post. There's some 17 different posts, but this is how he starts it. Why am I so unimpressed by these strikes? Israel and the U.S. have failed to target significant elements of Iran's nuclear materials and production infrastructure. He says Rising Lion and Midnight Hammer are tactically brilliant, but may turn out to be strategic failures. Would you agree?
I think we'll see. I think what we don't know is if this operation was successful, if it was the right thing to do. I think we do know now that it was done the wrong way because the president didn't engage Congress, didn't engage the American people, didn't get any authority, didn't even have real counsel with the American people. So I think we're starting out on the wrong foot because the way he decided to execute this mission. We're going to probably debate this over the next couple of days. There's also going to be classified information that we don't have, that the military and the Pentagon has. But I think we're also entering another new normal, John, which is important to emphasize. The world doesn't wait for America anymore. The world doesn't have to wait for Donald Trump. They don't have to wait for the American military. And that's what Netanyahu and Israel have done here. It was clear that they were going to proceed with this operation whether America was on board or not. Trump jumped in late, and now in some ways he's playing, kind of public policy catch-up. But I think we have to also appreciate that the Israelis don't have to ask for our permission. And they've made it clear that they're going to pursue any nuke elements inside Iran until they're eliminated. Whether they can get other allies around the world to support that or not, I don't think they're holding out for that. They're clear that they're going to move forward, especially when missiles are falling on Tel Aviv. And that's also a reflection of our different global standing and, frankly, I think the challenges we have with President Trump, where some folks don't trust him, some folks don't trust our intelligence leaders, and they're going to move forward whether America supports them or not.
Paul Rieckhoff, our guest in this hour of the Washington Journal. Happy to take your phone calls. Here's how you can join the conversation. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Democrats, 202-748-8000. Independents, 202-748-8002. And we are setting aside a separate line for active and former military. 202-748-8003 is that number for you to call in, and we'll go to that line as often as possible. Paul Rieckhoff, as folks are calling in, who are the Independent Veterans of America, the organization that you founded and CEO of?
I think it's an important time to explain this mission to the American people. I've worked with veterans for over 20 years. We've been advocates, and I've been on your program and others as we fought for a new GI Bill, for an improved VA, to improve care for suicide, expand care for women veterans. Most recently, we helped lead the expansion of support for veterans exposed to toxins like Agent Orange and burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there's been really a 20-year movement of veterans veterans who want to step up to lead in this country in different ways. But most of them aren't Democrats or Republicans. They're really frustrated and I think sometimes outraged by the partisanship that dominates our country. And there's no finer example than right now what's happening in America every single day. They want to continue to serve. They want to lead for this country. They want to put country over politics, but they don't want to pick a party. And there wasn't really an organization focused on that. So we created one. We've had a wide support from folks like Ken Burns and Admiral Mike Mullen, Yemi Mobolade, who's an independent mayor of Colorado Springs, in creating the support for these young men and women who want to run for office, whether it's for school board all the way up to U.S. Senate. We founded the organization on Independence Day last year. We ran 11 candidates, all independents, from Senate all the way down to school board. We had 4 victories, and that was really our test case. Now we've got over 300 men and women who are independent veterans who want to run for public office. We want to help them. We want to help support them. We want to help them train them, and we want to help them win. Because right now, if you want to run as an independent, not as a Republican or a Democrat, it's pretty lonely. But our men and women in uniform are up for hard fights. They've done it before. And most of all, John, they want to continue to serve. So I think it's in the best interest of all Americans. All 3 of those call lines, I think, should support our efforts at IVA to help elect more independent veterans, because especially right now, as we're talking about Iran, we're talking about deployment of National Guard troops, we need veterans who understand the cost of war. But we also need folks that are politically independent, who aren't aligned to a party but put their country first, and that's what IVA is all about.
And the website, independentveteransofamerica.org. Easy enough to find. Plenty of callers for you already, sir. This is Renee in Brooklyn, Democrat. Good morning. Renee, you with us?
Hello?
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the call. And I'm a ma'am. And I want to
Go ahead, ma'am.
Mr. Rieckhoff. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rieckhoff, for his service. I really appreciate it. My question is, since they've closed the strait, or at least the Iranian parliament has decided to close the strait, do you think that Iran will strike back physically, or do you think they will try to cripple us economically? And also, my last question is, do you think that perhaps Bibi has influenced Trump and has and does have him in his under his control, and that anything else that happens to Israel that we'll also be involved with, because Bibi is also talking to Trump? Thank you so much.
Mr. Rieckhoff.
I think what we really have to recognize, and I think we sometimes forget, is war goes sideways, right? It's easy to start war. It's hard to stop it. I would anticipate, and I know that folks in the Pentagon who are planning are anticipating all contingencies. I think it's important to underscore the Iranian proxies have been hitting Americans since I was in Iraq in 2004. They were launching projectiles into Humvees and killing Americans when we had them in Iraq. They've been firing on U.S. military bases in Syria and Iraq. The Houthis have been lobbing attacks for years now. So Iran is a bad actor here. And they are no friend of America. Whether or not this strike is justified and effective is, I think, a different conversation. But we have to underscore that Iranians are trying to actively kill Americans before this happened. I would be very surprised if they didn't escalate that now. The Strait is obviously an area of concern. There's been a lot of reporting and talk about Iranian sleeper cells across the Middle East, across Europe, and across America even. We're going to find out how real those are. And there's another point that I want to underscore, John and Renee, that I think is really, really important. I mean, we just got through this weekend of tremendous tension. We got through last weekend's protests and the military parade in Washington, D.C., and there were very few security incidents. That's a testament to our national security folks. That's a testament to our intelligence folks, the FBI, local law enforcement, all the folks that are standing watch on buildings and tunnels and roadways. They're not political. And no matter who's president, no matter what's happening in Washington, those folks are keeping us safe. And I think they've done a pretty miraculous job since 9/11 keeping us safe. But right now, the threat level is going to be even higher. And with regard to the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu, I'm not going to predict anything in that area. I think those are two extremely unpredictable guys. They are definitely aggressive in their national security posture, in their deployment of military forces, and they're also, really cognizant of their domestic politics back home. President Trump is now under tremendous pressure from within his own movement, within the MAGA movement, because he promised no wars. We all know that. That's not a partisan thing to say Trump promised no wars, and now we've got a new war. I do think we have to be really vigilant in holding public leaders accountable to their language use. I saw the vice president this weekend on television saying, well, it's not war. It feels like war to the people in Iran. It feels like war to the people who are flying those planes and to our military forces around the world that are on guard. So whether you call it war or not, it's conflict, it's combat, and I don't want to let politicians get away with semantics games at the expense of the truth and transparency, especially when it comes to American lives.
That line for current and former military. This is Mike, Narrowsburg, New York. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I'd just like to say that I'm a veteran from the United States Navy, and I really do resent a draft dart to represent me in Congress as president. But what I'd really like to say is I don't think that we accomplished anything. They said that we bombed the nuclear facilities, yet there's been no any evidence that any radioactive material was even touched. From what I understand, the Saudis have people doing radiological tests, and there has been no. If you blow up 800 pounds of radioactive material, there has to be some sort of radioactive waste, I would imagine. And I haven't heard of anything like that. And it makes me think that they bombed an empty place, that they moved the stuff, and there's no radiological evidence that they destroyed anything. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. Thank you.
Mr. Rieckhoff.
Mike, appreciate your service, man. Look, I'm a guy who spent a year running around Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction. I understand your skepticism, and I think our generation of veterans especially understands that skepticism. We remember, the testimonies before the UN and the presentations of Yellow Cake. I mean, some folks are young enough now not to have been born for that time, but I think it's important for folks to know that, the American people are right to be cynical. They're right to question their leaders, and there's no more important time to do it than in times of war. That's patriotism, in my view. Vigilance is the price of freedom, and we've all got to be vigilant right now and ask those tough questions. And yeah, you've got to ask them even more so when the president's somebody who has not personally experienced the cost of war. This is not like having a John McCain or a John Kerry or someone else up there who served in uniform. That's why I've been so committed to trying to help elect veterans, because it is important to have that firsthand experience. It's important to know what the costs of war are, to know what it's like to see your buddies wounded and die. This is also, a test for some of the younger generation of folks that serve in this cabinet. The vice president is himself an Iraq war vet. He's a Marine vet. Pete Hegseth is also, the SecDef is also a post 9/11 veteran. Tulsi Gabbard is another one who's a post 9/11 veteran. And although we disagree on politics oftentimes, I know 2 out of the 3 of them. And I hope that they will answer this moment with their experience and educate the president and inform the president and speak from their heart and on behalf of the millions of men and women who can't be in that office. We need those veterans and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Kane, to flex that experience and make sure the president fully understands the stakes of what we're facing here.
What are your thoughts on President Trump publicly contradicting Tulsi Gabbard and the state of that relationship between the Director of National Intelligence and the president?
It's bad. It's bad. Anytime our leadership is not on the same page, our enemies are celebrating, John. And I've underscored this throughout the last couple of months. All this conflict, all this political division, the inability of America to work together with one voice has our enemies celebrating. This is somebody he picked himself just a couple of months ago. When Tulsi Gabbard was in Congress, I worked with her pretty closely on issues like burn pits. She led some bipartisan legislation. That was a very different political iteration of Tulsi Gabbard. She's gone, left the Democratic Party, become an independent, and now joined Trump. So, look, if I was a betting person, I would say that the most likely person to be fired by Trump would be the person who used to be a Democrat. But it's clear that they're not on the same page right now. And part of what they should do if they were doing the right thing is show that they're on the same page. Stand forward publicly, speak with one voice, and ensure that our intelligence community especially isn't caught in the middle of this political squabbling. There were a lot of, I think, understandable reservations about Tulsi Gabbard in this role. And if she's not on the same page with the Commander-in-Chief, those concerns are exacerbated. We've also seen the Secretary of Defense under tremendous pressure from within folks that he hired. There's been a lot of chaos at the Pentagon. Anytime there's chaos, anytime there's division, they can try to clean it up on the airwaves or on Fox News, but we can all see what's happening. And when they're not united with one voice, we're less safe. And I think that's the bottom line.
Back to that line for current and former military. This is Steve, Petersburg, Tennessee. Good morning.
Good morning. Paul, thank you for your excellent presentation. I support what he did and the bombing and the way that the military conducted it. But I think Congress needs to take on the responsibility now to debate it and to authorize it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Rieckhoff.
Thank you, sir. Look, I mean, even if you hate Donald Trump, it doesn't mean that this was necessarily the wrong move. And that's the hard part about our politics right now. It's no secret that Trump is unpopular in many parts of this country, but he still has a responsibility as Commander-in-Chief to do the right thing and keep us safe. And everything that I'm saying to you right now, assuming it was a different president, a Democrat in office, I would be pretty consistent. And I think most folks who consider themselves politically independent, who are focused on national security first, would also be consistent. I think all presidents over the last 2 decades especially should have consulted with Congress, should have asked for authorization, should have had more transparent conversations with the American people so that it doesn't become a political chew toy for years later on cable news. I mean, every major national security issue, if you think back to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, now the deployment of troops into L.A. and other places, it's become so divisive. And I do think that Trump has to take responsibility for that. He's politicized the military, in my view, in ways that's never been done before, most recently in his speech at Fort Bragg, where he asked the 82nd Airborne to boo the media and boo his political enemies. We don't do that in America, and I think that's very dangerous territory to drag our troops into. And what I also deeply worry about is the popularity of our military. After Vietnam, the popularity of the military was not in a great place, and my generation, the Vietnam vets and so many others, worked hard to get people to separate the war from the warriors, and we made good progress. We got this country to understand that the politics are separate from the warfighters. This has blurred all that. And I think it's really dragging down the popularity of our troops. And I hope folks that will remember that no matter what Trump says or any Democrat says, we got to stand by our troops because they're not picking their battles. They get sent where they go and they do their mission. And they're the men and women that deserve our support, especially when they come home. Because every time a president engages in a new round of warfare or combat, they never talk about what they're going to do at the VA. They never talk about the plan to take care of these men and women when they come home. Now, right now, thankfully, there have been no casualties. There's no boots on the ground. But I would encourage everybody, every time you hear a politician say they're going to deploy troops, even if it's to a place like Los Angeles, it doesn't come without risk. And it should be complemented with a plan for veteran support at the VA and beyond.
On the VA for a second, there's a column in today's Washington Times. Danielle Hall is the columnist. Let veterans choose the help they need. The system meant to care for veterans is breaking down. Danielle Hall writes, it's slow and outdated and often leaves people stranded. Congress now has a chance to act, pointing to the Choice Act. What is the Choice Act?
Well, let's put that in context, right? So it's in the Washington Times and it's calling for expanded privatization. That's where the Choice Act was a very skillfully labeled piece of legislation that increased the percentage of privatization that was happening at the Department of Veterans Affairs. It came out of the Shinseki scandal when Eric Shinseki resigned during the Obama administration, and John McCain and Bernie Sanders at that point hashed out a deal that became the Choice Act, which created the largest expansion of privatization at the VA since the VA was created and made into a federal agency. And here's the reality, in my view. It sounds good. Yes, send them out into the private market and they should have whatever options that they want. But it doesn't always work out that way. There's not always specialized care. Sometimes better care is at the VA. The execution of integrating all those different networks is hard. And the truth is, most veterans rate the quality of their care at the VA pretty high. Access is often a problem, and it's very, very irregular. But there's often this battle between folks on the left who say that the VA is absolutely perfect and can do no wrong and should be a model for nationalized health care. And there are folks on the other side that say we need to privatize the whole thing. And I think, like so many other issues, the best course of action is probably somewhere in the middle. That doesn't make for good talking points. It doesn't allow politicians to dunk on each other in newspaper columns. But the reality is we need an innovative VA that can blend those things and deliver veterans the best care possible. And sometimes that's going to be VA, sometimes it's not. But to assume that it's some kind of ideological purity test, I think is really fraught with danger. And I think it also underscores how the VA has become politicized. The VA, the House Veterans Affairs Committee, Senate Veterans Affairs Committee used to be an oasis of bipartisanship. It used to be one place where Republicans and Democrats get along. That's not true anymore. Like every other part of Washington right now, unfortunately, it's become extremely partisan, too often ideologically driven, and a group of folks, in this case veterans, are caught in the middle.
Back to that line for current and former military. This is Tim, North Carolina. Good morning.
Good morning. I served at the Army Security Agency field station in Asmara, Ethiopia. It's in Eritrea now. I was there for the 1967 war. So I've had a front row seat to a couple of bad situations, the shooting up of the USS Liberty, as well as the conflict in 67. Having said all that, I think Trump has a problem of being manipulated by people telling him what he wants to hear, not what he needs to hear. It's obvious to me that Netanyahu needs this conflict to keep him out of jail, because he too has been accused of financial crimes.
So, Tim, what does Donald Trump need to hear right now?
He needs to hear the truth from our intelligence people, other than maybe Gifford. There is such a thing as a truth. If he thinks that Netanyahu is telling him the truth, he is sadly mistaken.
Paul Rieckhoff.
These are deep waters, and I think there's a lot of manipulation happening, and we're not even talking about Putin and Ukraine and so many other elements that are on the national security chessboard here. I think all presidents need the truth, especially around national security issues. We don't know a lot about the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Kaine. He hasn't been a public figure. He hasn't been as well known to members of Congress and the public as other nominees. So I think he is really the linchpin right here. We know how important General Milley was in the first Trump administration. Trump came in and replaced C.Q. Brown, and he's gone with Kaine. And I think Kaine is maybe one of the most important links in the chain of our democracy right now. He's got to stand up to Trump every single day when necessary. He's got to be an advocate for our men and women in uniform. And I personally would like to hear from him a lot more often. The Pentagon used to do weekly press conferences. The Pentagon would open the doors, and the Secretary of Defense every Friday pretty much would do a press conference. You'd have access to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We don't have that right now. And I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. I think you should have a problem with that. Anytime men and women are being sent into harm's way and there's not an opportunity for the press to ask hard questions on behalf of the American people, and also on behalf of the mothers and fathers who have their kids in uniform. That is a very dangerous place we've come right now with the way this administration and the Secretary of Defense are approaching national security. They didn't do press conferences while they were deploying troops into Los Angeles. They didn't do press conferences when they sent the Marines in. And that's a very basic part of the American expectation that I think is a healthy one. And I think we'll probably go deeper into the deployment of troops in Los Angeles and now in 3 other states. But especially as they're blowing through guardrails that have been designed to protect our military and protect our democracy, we need to hear from them every single day. I think we should hear from the SecDef or the area commander in Los Angeles, which is still ongoing, every single day. If you think back to the Gulf War, where you'd have General Schwarzkopf and others would brief the American people. Here's a graph. Let me tell you what happened on the battlefield today. We should get that every day from these areas of operation, especially in the places where they're deploying U.S. troops on U.S. soil.
About 25 minutes left with Paul Rieckhoff this morning. Did want to note, and it's news to you as well, Mr. Rieckhoff, that we're hearing that the press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, is expected to come out to the camera that's positioned on the White House lawn and speak to reporters sometime in the next couple minutes. We will take that live and then come back and get your reaction to it and finish our conversation when that does happen. So we'll monitor that camera as we continue to hear from callers with Paul Rieckhoff. It's the Independent Veterans of America, independentveteransofamerica.org, and his podcast as well, the Independent Americans podcast. You can get wherever you get your podcasts. And this is Ron out of New Hampshire, and independent. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. I want to remind everyone that a nuclear power plant that generates electricity competes with oil and gas because oil and gas would normally be used to produce that electricity. All of these wars are oil wars. Iran, Iraq, the Gaza Strip, Afghanistan, they're all oil wars. Right now, Iran is creating a bunch of nuclear power plants that compete with oil and gas. The Gaza Strip, that war broke out just months after the Palestinians got approval to begin developing the Gaza Marine gas field. Afghanistan, Russia, and the U.S. take turns attacking Afghanistan to keep their huge oil reserves off the market. These are all oil wars.
That's Ron in New Hampshire. Mr. Rieckhoff, I believe Carolyn Leavitt is coming up to the camera right now. Actually, still not there yet, so go ahead. Get your response. We have time.
There's a lot to unpack there. Look, I mean, resources are always an issue here. I mean, we've seen that most recently with the so-called minerals deal in Ukraine. I think it's really important for folks to understand, especially in the context of that for the most part, when Americans have stood on the side of freedom, the only thing we've asked for is a place to bury our dead. And in my view, that's how it should be. I have a problem with the minerals deal because I just don't think we should be in a position where it seems like we're doing a quid pro quo. I believe we should stand with Ukraine because they're fighting for freedom and they're fighting against the bad guys in Russia who are abducting children and raping people and committing war crimes. But I think we're in a place where America has to constantly explain ourselves. If the president doesn't say we're not there for the oil, we're not there for the resources, and sometimes even says the opposite, I think that undermines our national security priorities. It undermines the global trust in America, and it undermines kind of the soul of what it means to be American. We shouldn't be asking for anything to do the right thing. And that's where so many generations of Americans have stood on the front lines in defense of freedom without asking for anything except a place to bury their dead.
Mr. Rieckhoff, a caller earlier, Tim was his name, said he had a front row seat to some bad situations in the past. What should viewers know about the book Chasing Ghosts?
I wrote this back in 2006 to try to give people an understanding of what it was like to be on the ground in Iraq. I was an infantry rifle platoon leader. I think I was on Cspan to talk about it at least once or a few times. And I was one of the earlier versions of first-person accounts when I think Americans were still trying to understand what it was like on the ground. I think maybe most of all what I'd tell you is that some of the stories of war are eternal. All the way back to the Romans. I mean, the commitment and the cost of war is exceptional. And I think that sometimes in America we can be removed from that, especially this time where we've got an all-volunteer military and there's no draft and less than 0.5% of folks have served. So for the most part, when folks watch this Iranian engagement this weekend, it wasn't their kids. And I think that's a really important challenge and issue that America has never really fully faced in this modern age of warfare since 9/11. We've got an all-volunteer military where very few folks serve, and they serve over and over again and at great cost. And most Americans live life uninterrupted. And that's great for our military. We've got an awesome, exceptionally professional military. But I would argue it's not great for our democracy. And now, over 20 years after 9/11, we see those examples. As you deploy folks in the Middle East and here at home, it's better for America when the military represents all of us. And that's part of what I tried to communicate in Chasing Ghosts, just the complexity of the human beings. The 38 men that I served with in Iraq, awesome dudes, and I love them all. But also, they came home to a country that wasn't ready to receive them. And some of them, over 20 years later are doing well. Some are not. We've lost a couple friends to suicide. We've had a couple folks that are wounded that are still struggling. So I think especially in times like this, it's easy to start war. It's really hard to end it. And the costs live on for generations. It's not just the men and women who are in harm's way. It's their families, it's their children, and it's the entire ecosystem that's around them.
And you wrote that book after founding another organization that C-SPAN viewers know well, the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. How many current Iraq and Afghanistan veterans are there in the United States? What's the population?
We've got over 1 million now, and they span all across this country. I think, if I can, John, this is a really important time for our community because they continue to graduate from college. One of the things I'm most proud of in our time at IAVA is we passed a new GI Bill, a bipartisan bill. Folks may remember we had Senator Warren and Senator Webb, right? We had a Democrat and a Republican working together to pass that GI Bill, and we got it done in 2008. And now, years later, we've had, I think, almost 1 million folks use it. It's been passed on to their kids, but every time around May and June, I want to take a minute to celebrate the fact that the GI Bill works. And there's a lot of incredible men and women who graduated this year, who've graduated over the last couple of years, who are going to grad school, they're doctors. And often in my show and my work, I say, look for the helpers. Times are tough right now. Everybody who's watching knows that especially. And I think sometimes folks can feel down or lose hope. And I take the line from Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers. And I think the men and women who've served of all generations are often the helpers. They're the ones who run in when others run out. They're not just B-2 pilots, but they're ambulance drivers and they're teachers and they're Little League coaches. And no matter what's happening in our politics, and especially when things are hard, they continue to step up. And that's maybe the most important part of my work, is advocating and reminding people that there are awesome leaders in this country. And independent from our politics, they're serving and leading every single day in ways that don't end up on C-SPAN and don't end up in the newspapers. And I want to salute them, especially this time of year. Congratulations to all the veteran graduates who use the GI Bill, especially, and their families and everybody who supported them.
As we continue to wait for Carolyn Levitt to come to the microphones on the north side of the White House lawn, we'll take a few more calls. This is on that line for current and former military. James, Ohio, good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead, James.
Good morning.
Sir.
What's your comment or question?
Morning, sir.
Well, I'm a World War II veteran and a Korean veteran. And May the 14th of 1948, I happened to be serving on the flagship of the USS Rochester. And Israel became a state. And a little Bible lesson here.
And James, I hate to cut you off, James, as a World War II veteran. So stay on the line, James. We'll come back to you in just a few minutes. We're going to hear from Carolyn Levitt now.
That should be accomplished through the Iranians, the Israelis, or the Americans. The president's posture and our military posture has not changed. The president was just simply raising a question that I think many people around the world are asking. If the Iranian regime refuses to give up their nuclear program or engage in talks, we just took out their nuclear program on Saturday night, as you all know. But if they refuse to engage in diplomacy moving forward, why shouldn't the Iranian people rise up against this brutal terrorist regime? That's a question the president raised last night. But as far as our military posture, it hasn't changed.
What is the timetable the president has given Iran right now to come to the negotiating table?
He has made his message to Iran quite clear.
On regime change, that question of if the president was supporting that idea of having Iran's supreme leader assassinated, he's now floating this idea of regime change. Is that an idea that you consider?
I'm not going to get ahead of the president. I just explained his truth to you last night.
Caroline, has there been any communications at all between the U.S. officials and the Iranians since these strikes? And have you gotten any indication that they are open to negotiating?
The Secretary of Defense said yesterday there has been both public and private messages sent to the Iranians since the very successful operation on Saturday night, and that remains the truth.
Strait of Hormuz, if Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz, is there a plan by the U.S. to add oil to the global market? We saw the Biden administration do the strategic petroleum release. Is there a plan?
I can assure you the administration is actively and closely monitoring the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranian regime would be foolish to make that decision. We'll see you all later, okay?
Thank you. Thanks, Caroline.
Speaking with reporters on the north side of the White House as she's going in for her day. Paul Rieckhoff, just your immediate reaction to some of her statements there.
Unfortunately, John, I didn't hear it. So if you can recap it for me, I can respond. But,
sure. She talked about the.
Also,
she was explaining the Truth Social post last night. That was the first couple questions that she got on the president, talking about the idea of regime change, saying that the president's posture has not changed, our military posture has not changed, saying he was raising the question, but that his posture has not changed. Also saying that he's closely monitoring the situation in the Strait of Hormuz and oil markets, but those were a few of her comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think it cuts to a more general issue. I would rather our commander-in-chief didn't determine global policy over Truth Social and over Twitter. I don't think it helps. I think a lot of these conversations are better happening in private and with more discipline and restraint. Over the weekend when he said evacuate Tehran, I mean, it often inflames tensions. It often makes people more nervous or more concerned. And most of all, what I really hope the president will do is tone down the rhetoric. This is a very hot environment around the country and around the world, and we need him to be at his best and to lower the temperature, to de-escalate the situation whenever possible. He can still be tough. He can still be strong. He can still stand with our military. But I think he has to do everything possible to de-escalate the situation in the Middle East, and especially here at home, you know, where we've still got, you know, U.S. troops on U.S. soil. We've got protests happening. We've got a lot of folks who are very concerned about the immigration raids and ICE. He's got to bring the temperature down and not bring it up. And you know, the World War II and Korean War veteran that we were just talking to before we went to that clip, maybe probably has a lot of perspective on that. But we need them to be more like the World War II veterans who were honorable and kind of quiet in their service, and they spoke softly and carried a big stick.
And thankfully, James, the World War II veteran, did stick around, and I appreciate it, James. Let me bring you back on the line. Go ahead with your comment for Paul Rieckhoff.
Okay, it's nice to speak to you this morning. I'm a World War II veteran of 16 million. Then I was called back to Korea in 1950 for a little session. And I want to recall to the people of the United States of America that on the 7th Fleet in May the 14th of 1948, I was on the flagship of the USS Rochester, and Israel became a state. And he said that this generation wouldn't pass, and I just happened to have a nice little birthday coming tomorrow. I'll be 96 years old. And I want to tell you one thing. God is still on the throne, and we don't need to be worried. He said there would be rumors of wars and earthquakes in diverse places. And this is happening, and I am waiting on the return of the Lord Jesus Christ, my Savior. And that's about all I have to say. Blessed be the United States of America, and you better watch out, because don't forget, Israel belongs to the Almighty. Thank you.
James, and a happy early birthday to you, James. Paul Rieckhoff, let you jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for your leadership and your service, sir. I mean, there's a reason why they call you all the greatest generation. You know, you set the tone and helped take this country to another level And unfortunately, there aren't enough of you around anymore. And happy birthday to you, and all the best to you and your family on your 96. And I think your wisdom is what we need in times like this. And I actually posted a message about this on Memorial Day, especially that there aren't too many World War II vets left. We've lost a lot of them. They're in their 90s now and further. And if there's one in your area, if there's one in your family, reach out to them. And maybe most importantly, listen. Hear their stories, learn their perspective. Let them know that they're appreciated, because a lot of them are also concerned about the state of this country right now. But they can help us get through it. Even in their later years, they have such tremendous wisdom and power. And I think we need a lot more of that. I wish the president would sit down with, maybe a 90-plus-year-old World War II veteran every day and ask for their counsel, because they've seen a lot, and we need them now more than ever.
Post-World War II, we had a lot of veterans who served in Congress, who worked up here on Capitol Hill. I wonder what your thoughts are about the number of members of Congress who have military experience, who have served in the armed forces today, and what this new generation of veterans could contribute to that.
Well, unfortunately, it's dropped tremendously as a percentage of the overall Congress, right, as it has as a percentage of the overall country. I started doing this work back in 2004 and 2005, and I've been honored to work alongside Republicans and Democrats who were World War II veterans, Vietnam veterans, and everywhere in between. I was honored to know folks like Bob Dole, and then folks like Frank Lautenberg, Jim Webb and John McCain, and so many others in between. We continue to lose them. Charlie Rangel just passed here in New York City, and if you haven't heard his Korean War stories, I was honored to hear them in person. And he basically said, if I ever live through this, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to helping others and to America. And I think that's the spirit that was really here for so many generations, and especially post-World War II. They had dinner together. Their families spent time together because they had that common experience of serving in the military, and that's not there as much anymore. So I think we need more veterans. That's why we created Independent Veterans of America, so we could get more veterans in Congress, but also at the local levels. I mean, there's an exciting opportunity for local mayors, for community leaders, for governors. We think we'll have at least 6 candidates for the Senate next year who will be independent veterans. We could see the same number of governors. Maybe one day we'll see a candidate for president. And I think that's very exciting, because sometimes they are still proxies for the parties. I think too often that's the case, where they can be as extreme as any other politicians, but oftentimes they're also moderate, and they work together. And you see that on issues ranging from the AUMF to burn pits to VA reform to now, I'm sure, even on Iran. We look to the bipartisanship that happens, especially among post-9/11 vets. I've said this before. I think we'll have a couple presidents that come out of our generation. We've already got the first vice president now in J.D. Vance, and Tim Walz was also a post-9/11 veteran himself, so you had both VP candidates who had served post-9/11. I think you're going to see a lot more of them, and I think that'll be a good thing for America, whether or not they win, but as they serve in the cabinet, as they continue to serve across government, I think that's going to be a good thing for our military, but more importantly, a good thing for America.
And just to put a cap on this conversation, for our visual learners, I want to show them this chart from the Pew Research Center. In the early 1970s, a full 3/4 of the House and 81% of the Senate had military experience, were veterans. By the year 2023, it was just 18% of the House and 17% of the Senate that had military experience, were veterans. Again, the Pew Research Center numbers. Less than 10 minutes left with Paul Rieckhoff this morning. Want to get more of your calls. DeAndre in Baltimore, Republican. Thanks for waiting.
Thank you for taking my call. So I'll make it quick here because I'm at work. To the gentleman that's here as a guest, make it quick. 3 points. The first one: why is the president ignoring the reports and info provided by the Director of National Intelligence and all the intelligence agencies, stating that there are no nuclear weapons being built in Iran since 2003? Second thing. How does it benefit us, going forward with diplomacy in the Middle East and our military, when we literally helped install in Syria a former leader of ISIS in Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Julani? And the third, how can we get justice? Because you're here from, on behalf of veterans. How can we get justice for the 34 U.S. sailors who were killed and the 173 who were injured on June 8th, 1967? It was the only time that the U.S. military was attacked and never responded, and that was done by our greatest ally. So that was the three things I just wanted you to point out for me. Thank you.
That's DeAndre calling from work in Baltimore. Paul Rieckhoff, go ahead.
Man, this is the interesting part of being on this show. That's a lot to unpack right there, John.
Take them in any order you want, or take whichever one you want.
Yeah. I mean, I think, maybe most importantly, in the context of what we're discussing now around Iran and intelligence, this is not happening in a vacuum. This is the unfortunate downstream impact of the Iraq War conversation, where Americans, in my view, were misled. The information was inaccurate. And when I got sent to Iraq in 2004, in my book, the first line I wrote was, George Bush had better be effing right, because we were getting sent into Iraq to find weapons of mass destruction. And if they weren't there, I thought that the impact for America would be devastating for decades, if not generations. And I think that's true. I think that's where we are now. I think Americans are right to question the intelligence, they're right to question their commander-in-chief, and he's got to go above and beyond to make a case and explain it. And that's what he's, I'm sure, trying to do today and throughout the next couple of days. And Congress needs to step up. They need to flex their muscle. They need to flex their authority, and in a bipartisan way. I think that too often the Republicans have been taking us off a cliff, and the Democrats can't stop them. And I think that's why more and more Americans are becoming political independents. 60% of young people are declaring themselves as political independents or unaffiliated. It's because they don't trust either party. And that's a reality right now that I think comes to a head most urgently around issues of national security. Americans, understandably, don't trust elected leaders. They don't trust the Republican and Democratic Party, and they're looking for leaders that can transcend that. Traditionally, they have come from the military community. Those are the people that have had the highest level of trust. That trust has been, unfortunately, eroded because of the politicization and because of this confluence of events. But I still think it's a place that we can look to for truth, for justice, for patriotism, for real patriotism. And I think, frankly, John, and to all of it, we're going to find out who steps up. We need the real patriots to step up right now and put country over party, be brave. And they're doing it at tremendous risk themselves and their families. When political attacks and assassinations are happening at an increased rate, this is a dangerous new environment we're walking into, but we need our leaders to lead the way and lead with truth and honesty, and most of all, real patriotism, not jingoism or party patriotism, but the true patriotism that this country was founded and built on.
Less than 5 minutes left with Mr. Rieckhoff this morning. Doug in Toronto, Ohio, writes in, as we've been having this conversation, I tuned in as you were saying that the president must get the people behind him before going to war. You seem to suggest that the USA should be run on popular decision. Social media has given every American a voice, whether informed or not. We have to trust that our leaders make the most prudent decisions, and in the freest nation on earth, we can choose to either agree or disagree with those decisions, ending by saying, God bless America. What would be your response to Doug?
I don't think social media, voicing yourself on social media is enough. And I don't think it's truly holding people accountable. Everyone can decide whether or not they trust in their leaders, but I'm always going to be skeptical. I'm always going to be vigilant. I'm always going to try to hold them accountable, because that's how I was taught by my World War II grandfather, who spent 3 years in the South Pacific after immigrating to this country. So that's how I was taught, and I think that's how many people were taught. I'm not going to buy anything from any politician without some level of scrutiny. And I don't think enough folks are involved. I don't think enough folks are voting. There are plenty of folks who are watching every minute of this coverage and watching C-SPAN every day, but there are more and more folks that are tuned out. They've been driven away by the divisiveness of our politics. They've been driven away by the violence and the energy, the negative energy that too often surrounds our politics. And we need more folks involved. We need more accountability. And we need more folks to run. That's a big reason why we started IVA as well, is because a lot of veterans have been fired recently. The federal government has fired tens of thousands of veterans. I think that is something that's not getting enough attention. Doge and Elon Musk and ultimately the president has fired tens of thousands of veterans. They didn't give them an off-ramp. They didn't give them a jobs program. They didn't hire them at Tesla. And many of them are now trying to figure out what's next. And to the ones that are listening, we hope you consider running for office. You can go to our website or you can explore other options. But we need you. Many of you are the most patriotic, and some of them have been purged. I call them the patriotic purge. They can right now, I think, represent a really important foundation of leadership that this country needs right now more than ever. And they're going to ask hard questions. And if you're watching C-SPAN right now, you probably ask hard questions. We're going to need you to do that more than ever.
One last call for you, and it's on that line for current and former military. Doug in South Dakota. Thanks for waiting.
Yes, good morning, Paul. I wanted to comment a couple of things on your the Fort Bragg situation. I was there 65 years ago, serving with the 82nd Airborne Division, and I remember President Kennedy showing up. He had something to do with the Green Berets at that time. But secondly, he did a Jeep tour around the parade field, dust, you name it, and there was no political speeches that I can remember whatsoever. Anyway, then flash forward. I have a grandson who's a captain in an artillery unit in a guard outfit, and he's presently in Polk, Louisiana, preparing to ship out. I don't know what to tell him. Have you got any words of wisdom? He's going over there.
Mr. Rieckhoff, give you the final 2 minutes.
I appreciate that, sir. Honestly, I tell him to talk to you because I think you do probably know what to tell him. And he needs to have a conversation with you. And I tell this of all young men and women who are considering joining the military. Don't just talk to your recruiter. Don't just read the books and watch the movies. Sit down with men and women who've gone down that road because they're going to give you the no BS. They're going to give you the ground truth. They're going to tell you what you really need to think about. And I think your story about Kennedy at Bragg is one I've heard before. And I think what's absolutely true is that presidents of both parties have not crossed the lines that President Trump crossed at Fort Bragg. This hasn't been. Now, I've been critical of Obama at times, of Trump in the past, of Biden any time they crossed that line and put troops behind them in a way that could be even considered political. But what we saw at Fort Bragg was way beyond anything we've seen in modern American history since the creation of the all-volunteer military. It is a dangerous place for the president to be using them as political props, to encourage them to engage in political conversation. Every unit commander knows the rules. If those young troops didn't know the rules, they're going to find them out now. And I think it's a very important wall that exists between our politics and our military. And when those two things get blurred, it's bad for everybody. So I'm grateful that, folks like your grandson there are stepping up and continuing to serve. We need them. But we all need to advocate for them because they're getting sent to some of the hardest missions possible. I think Iraq and Afghanistan were very hard, very complex, very daunting. But to get sent into Los Angeles in between ICE agents and protesters, that's a whole new level of danger and risk and difficulty. And it's not what many of them signed up for. So we didn't get a chance to talk enough about that. But I do think what's happening in Los Angeles is an abuse of power. I think it's an overreach, even if it's not declared illegal. I don't think it's smart for the president to deploy U.S. troops in this way. I was a member of the New York Army National Guard. I was deployed here in New York stateside, but that was for 9/11. That was after we were struck and they knocked down the towers on 9/11, not far from here. That was, in my view, a warranted response to deploy the National Guard to secure New York City, to secure Washington. This is not 9/11. A group of rioters that the LAPD, for the most part, had under control, I think is a different situation. And I would encourage everybody to be vigilant in watching those deployments, asking hard questions, because now they've also deployed federal troops in 3 other states, Texas, Louisiana, and Florida, I believe. And that could be expanded over the next couple of weeks at a rate that most Americans aren't paying attention to. And whether, especially for folks who are Second Amendment folks who are always concerned about government overreach, this, in my view, is what government overreach looks like. We've got American troops on U.S. soil, and we have not had enough of a conversation with Congress and with the American people about what that really means for everyone, but especially for those young men and women who are out there holding a rifle in the sun right now.
independentveteransofamerica.org is the website. Paul Rieckhoff is the founder and CEO of that group. And we do always appreciate your time on the Washington Journal, sir.
Thank you, sir, for what you do. It's a tremendous service. Appreciate your program and appreciate your leadership, especially in times like this.